What happens when the empath finally chooses themselves? This is not a small question. It is not a casual turn of phrase. It is the kind of question that shakes the foundations of the soul. For when the empath, long accustomed to being the mirror for everyone else, dares to say no more, the entire psychic order begins to tremble. Imagine, for years, living as a vessel, absorbing the cries of others, carrying their shadows, patching wounds that were never yours. You mistake being needed for being loved. You confuse self-erasure with safety. And you carry the secret hope that if you can heal everyone else, maybe, just maybe, you will never be abandoned. But then, it happens. The vessel breaks. The empath stops asking, "What do they need from me?" and whispers instead, "What do I need from myself?" In that instant, an ancient bargain collapses. The sacrificial lamb dies, and the sovereign archetype, the ruler of the inner kingdom, is born. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that is what this journey is about. Not selfishness, not cruelty, but the courage to step into your own wholeness. Yet beware, when this shift begins, guilt will rise like a phantom. The inner accuser will cry, "Selfish, heartless, cruel." And the world will echo that voice, because the world has always fed on your endless availability. But if you endure, if you dare to keep watching, you'll discover the moment where love itself is reborn, not as possession, not as dependency, but as authenticity. That moment is revealed in part 7 of this journey. If you miss it, you will misunderstand the true nature of love. That's why I invite you, don't leave, not yet. And if these words already stir something in you, type in the comments right now, "I choose myself today." Declare it, not just for me, but for you. And if you've ever given more than you had to give, hit the like button. Subscribe if you are ready to walk this road with us, because the path of individuation is not a luxury. It is the most important journey of your life.
Have you ever noticed how intoxicating it feels when someone says, "I don't know what I'd do without you"? The words land like a warm embrace, like proof that you matter. But what if that statement, what if that need, is not love at all, but the most beautiful trap the empath will ever fall into? From childhood, many empaths are trained without even realizing it. They learn to scan the room before they speak. They read the emotional weather of their parents before they dare to show their own feelings. They become fluent in unspoken moods, in subtle shifts of tone, in the quick glance that signals anger or disappointment. It is a survival strategy, not a gift freely chosen. Jung reminded us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What began as survival in a storm becomes the fate of the empath's adulthood. Picture a child who grows up thinking, "If I can keep mom calm, if I can keep dad from drinking, if I can soothe everyone else, then maybe I'll be safe." That child becomes the adult who attracts partners, friends, even coworkers who lean heavily on them, who use their sensitivity as a crutch. And the empath, now fully grown, feels the same hit of validation. They need me. Therefore, I am loved. But pause for a moment. Needing is not the same as loving. A crutch does not love the one who leans on it. A mirror does not receive affection for reflecting back someone's image. And yet for years, perhaps decades, the empath accepts this bargain. They give their energy, their time, their body, their very soul in exchange for the illusion of love. This is projection in its rawest form. Others place their unlived lives, their abandoned shadows, their unresolved wounds onto the empath, who carries them as if they were their own. The empath feels indispensable, but indispensability is not intimacy. Being consumed is not the same as being cherished. Think of it this way. The empath becomes like a candle burning in a crowded, cold room. Everyone gathers close, shivering in the light and warmth. But no one asks how long the flame can last. No one considers that the candle itself is melting away. And yet the empath doesn't complain. Why? Because being the flame feels powerful. Because disappearing slowly feels safer than facing the terror of abandonment. Underneath the service, beneath the sacrifice, is a hunger that whispers, if I keep them whole, maybe I'll never be alone. Can you see the paradox? The empath gives in order to be kept. They vanish in order to be visible. They erase themselves in order to be remembered. This is why the trap is beautiful, because it looks like devotion. It feels like intimacy. It carries the aroma of love. But it is not love. It is possession dressed as affection. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and the empath knows this terror too well." Accepting oneself would mean saying, my needs matter as much as yours. My pain deserves a voice. My boundaries are sacred. But in the beautiful trap, those words feel unthinkable. They feel like betrayal. So the empath stays. They become the quiet therapist in every relationship, the peacekeeper at every holiday dinner, the colleague who absorbs the tension no one else can bear. Their worth is measured not by who they are, but how much they can carry. And in this carrying, they mistake weight for love. But let me ask you, how long can a person live like this before the body breaks? Before depression sets in like an anchor at the bottom of the sea? Before mysterious illnesses, aches, and exhaustion reveal the hidden truth that a soul cannot live forever as someone else's vessel? The beautiful trap is seductive because it works, at least for a while. It grants the empath a place in the world, a role to play, an identity that feels indispensable. But the cost is staggering. They wake up one day and realize they no longer know who they are, apart from what others need them to be. So the real question becomes, when the empath finally recognizes this trap, when they realize that being needed is not the same as being loved, what happens next? That, my friends, is where the breaking point arrives. And when it does, the entire unconscious begins to tremble.
Have you ever watched a glass vessel fill with water drop by drop until one final drop sends it spilling over? That last drop is small, almost invisible, yet it changes everything. For the empath, this is the moment of breaking. After years of absorbing shadows, silencing their own needs, and confusing sacrifice for love, there comes a day when the vessel finally says, "No more." This breaking point rarely announces itself politely. It comes as a collapse of the body, panic attacks, exhaustion, mysterious illnesses that no doctor can explain. It comes as a midnight sob, when the empath realizes they cannot carry one more demand, one more wound that does not belong to them. Sometimes it comes as anger, sharp and startling, shocking even to the empath themselves. They say no for the first time, and the world shakes. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. That pain is the birth pangs of the empath's awakening." For the first time, they turn the mirror inward and ask, "What do I need? What is my voice saying beneath the noise of everyone else?" It feels like blasphemy, a betrayal of everything they were conditioned to believe. From childhood, they were trained to equate love with self-erasure. To put themselves first feels criminal. The inner accuser rises immediately, selfish, heartless, cruel. But this is not selfishness, it is sovereignty. It is the moment the archetype of the sacrificial lamb dies and the archetype of the sovereign begins to stir. Think of Persephone in Greek myth. She is stolen into the darkness of Hades, stripped of her old identity. But she does not remain a victim. She emerges as queen of the underworld. In the same way, the empath's descent into guilt and fear is not the end, but the beginning of their crown. At the breaking point, the empath experiences what mystics call the dark night of the soul. The stage of life they once played on, savior, healer, scapegoat, suddenly feels hollow. The actors around them vanish, the lights dim, and they are left standing alone in silence. This emptiness terrifies them. Who am I if I am not the one who fixes, the one who absorbs, the one who holds everyone else together? And yet, in this very silence lies the seed of transformation. For individuation begins not in applause, but in the abyss. Jung described the self as both the center and the circumference of the psyche, something larger than the persona, larger than the roles we play. At the breaking point, the empath catches the first faint whisper of that deeper self. It says, "You exist beyond what others need you to be. You are more than a vessel. You are the flame itself." This is why the breaking point is both terrifying and holy. It is the collapse of the old identity, but also the birth of a new archetype. Each "no" that the empath dares to speak becomes a sword, cutting through invisible chains that bound them to unconscious servitude. Each refusal plants a flag in the soil of their own inner kingdom. But do not mistake this for an easy victory. The world does not applaud when the empath begins to choose themselves. Friends may accuse them of changing. Family may guilt them for being distant. Lovers may rage, "You're not the same person I fell in love with." And in a way, they are right. The empath is no longer the bottomless well they once were. But this loss, this backlash, is the proof that sovereignty is real. For if the old roles still worked, no one would resist the change. So the empath stands at a threshold. Behind them lies the familiar prison of pleasing. Ahead lies the unknown wilderness of selfhood. The ground shakes. Fear whispers, "Go back, play the role, it's safer there." But another voice, faint yet steady, says, "Forward, even if you walk alone." The breaking point is the doorway into individuation, but it is also the descent into shadow. For to claim sovereignty, the empath must not only face guilt, but the darker forces within, the rage, the desire, the hunger long denied. And here is the paradox. What feels like destruction is actually preparation. So let me ask you, when the empath drops the mask, when they step into the abyss of their own unacknowledged shadow, what will they find waiting there? That is where we must go next.
Have you ever been startled by your own anger? An eruption so sharp it feels foreign, almost monstrous. For the empath, this eruption is often the most terrifying moment of all. They have built an identity around being gentle, kind, endlessly available. Yet at the breaking point, something ancient stirs in the depths. Rage rises like a wolf long caged. Desire slithers forward like a serpent from the dark soil. And the abandoned child, lonely, hungry, aching, pounds on the door of the psyche demanding to be seen. Carl Jung reminded us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The empath's journey into wholeness is not the discovery of more light, but the courage to face this inner wilderness, the wolf, the serpent, the child. For years, they scattered their energy outward, feeding these creatures to others. They offered their strength to shield, their desire to please, their innocence to comfort. But now the shadow comes home, and the empath must learn to embrace it. Consider the wolf of rage. For the empath, anger was often forbidden territory. As children, they learned quickly that expressing fury risked rejection. Better to swallow it, bury it, transform it into service. But no energy disappears. What is repressed lives on in the unconscious. When the wolf finally breaks free, it does not come to destroy, it comes to protect. Rage is the instinct that says, "Here and no further." It is the fire that burns through manipulation. Without it, the empath remains defenseless. With it, they finally stand in dignity. Then comes the serpent of desire. Desire too was dangerous. To want was selfish. To hunger was shameful. So the empath learned to live for the needs of others, convincing themselves they had none of their own. But the serpent whispers a forgotten truth. Desire is not only longing, it is wisdom. To feel the stirrings of passion is to feel the pulse of life itself. Without desire, the empath cannot create, cannot move forward, cannot claim their own destiny. The serpent's coils are not chains, but currents of creative power. And finally, the forgotten child. This is perhaps the most haunting figure of all. The child who once hid their tears to keep the family together. The child who learned that silence was safer than truth, that giving was safer than asking. Buried deep in the unconscious, this child reappears in dreams, small, fragile, weeping in a corner, begging to be held. For the empath, to embrace this child is to embrace their own innocence, to recognize that their needs were never a burden, their voice never unworthy. The child is not weakness, it is the root of authenticity. At this stage, the empath feels torn open. Rage shakes their hands, desire burns in their chest, the child's cry echoes in their ears. They fear they are unraveling, becoming someone unrecognizable. But in truth, they are becoming whole. Jung called this the integration of the shadow, the process of reclaiming everything that was once split off, denied, or shamed. It is not an easy integration. The empath may dream of being chased through dark forests, of wrestling beasts, of meeting strange figures who hand them weapons or keys. These are not nightmares, they're initiations. Imagine a dream where the empath stands at the edge of a wild forest. From the trees emerges the wolf, teeth bared. But instead of running, the empath holds out their hand. The wolf does not bite, it bows. In another dream, a serpent coils around their body. At first, they gasp in fear, but then realize the serpent is guiding them, whispering truths long hidden. And in yet another dream, the child places a tiny hand in theirs, and together they walk into the light. Such dreams reveal the paradox. The shadow is not an enemy, but an ally waiting to be loved. This is the rebirth moment. When the empath stops fighting their own shadow, something miraculous happens. They discover the wolf is not only rage, but strength. The serpent is not only desire, but wisdom. The child is not only need, but innocence. By embracing these aspects, the empath integrates their wholeness. They are no longer defined by the persona of the gentle healer. They are fierce yet compassionate, strong yet tender, rooted yet open. They become a paradox, alive in their fullness. But this transformation does not go unnoticed. The world that once fed on their endless giving now recoils. Friends may whisper, "You've changed." Family may accuse them of arrogance. Lovers may fear the fire in their eyes. For those who benefited from the empath's shadow exile, its return feels like betrayal. Yet this resistance is proof of transformation. Every step toward integration shakes the collective as well. So here lies the question. When the empath claims their rage, their desire, their forgotten child, when they integrate what was once buried, how will they wield this new power? The answer will take us deeper into the death of the martyr and the end of the savior complex.
Have you ever noticed how some people cling to their wounds as if they were treasures? They tell the same story again and again, not to release it, but to rehearse it. And the empath, with their open heart, becomes the chosen audience, the eternal caretaker. But here lies the brutal truth. You cannot heal someone who is addicted to their pain. To keep trying is not compassion, it is martyrdom. For years, the empath has carried the savior complex like a sacred duty. If they could absorb enough suffering, maybe the world would be whole. If they could fix enough people, maybe love would finally be secure. But this saving is a hidden bargain. Beneath the kindness lurks a silent plea. If I rescue you, will you stay? If I give you all of me, will you never leave? Jung understood this danger. He wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent." And many empaths are still carrying those unlived lives, not just for parents, but for partners, friends, even strangers. Imagine a drowning man who refuses to swim. No matter how many times you dive into the water, he pulls you down with him. That is what the savior complex does.
The empath jumps again and again, not realizing that sometimes the most loving act is to let go. To stop rescuing is not cruelty, it is clarity. At this stage, the empath begins to see through the illusion. They realize that much of their compassion was actually a transaction. If I give you my energy, will you give me belonging? If I fix your chaos, will you give me love? But such bargains always fail because true love is not bought with self-erasure. True compassion does not enslave. Think of the archetype of the martyr, the figure nailed to the cross of everyone else's needs. The martyr believes suffering is proof of virtue, but the death of the martyr is essential for individuation. Jung once said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration." To integrate means recognizing that endless sacrifice is not wholeness, it is fragmentation. This is why each no matters so deeply. When the empath declines to answer the midnight call from someone who refuses to change, they reclaim a piece of themselves. When they walk away from the endless drama of a partner who thrives on chaos, they plant their flag in the soil of sovereignty. Each no is not rejection of love, but the restoration of dignity. Of course, the world resists this change. Those who once leaned heavily on the empath's endless giving often lash out. They accuse, "You've grown cold, you've become selfish." But what they truly mean is, "You've stopped carrying my shadows for me." And isn't that the point? To stop carrying what was never yours? Consider the difference between empathy and codependency. Empathy says, "I see your pain and I care." Codependency says, "I see your pain and I must fix it or I cannot be okay." The empath's transformation is the movement from codependency back to true empathy. They can stand beside another's suffering without drowning in it. They can love without losing themselves. Here lies the mystical paradox. When you cease trying to save others, you begin to truly see them. No longer blurred by the haze of your own need to rescue, you can finally witness another human being as they are, responsible for their choices, capable of their own healing. And in releasing them, you are released yourself. Think of it as placing a mirror in someone's hands. You no longer carry their wounds on your back. You say instead, "This is yours, and I will not steal it from you." Some will hate you for this. Some will call you cruel. But others, perhaps only a few, will awaken. They will recognize that the burden is theirs to carry, and in that recognition, they too may begin their journey of individuation. This is the death of the martyr. The empath no longer bleeds themselves dry to keep others whole. They step down from the cross of unconscious sacrifice and walk into the wild territory of the self. It is frightening, yes, but it is also liberating. So, let me ask you, if the martyr must die for the sovereign to live, what crown waits on the other side of this death? That is where we must go next.
Have you ever dreamed of standing at an altar with a stranger, about to speak vows you never rehearsed? Or of two rivers merging into one, carrying you away in currents both fierce and tender? These images may sound strange, but for the empath who has survived the death of the martyr, such dreams are archetypal signposts. They announce the next stage of individuation, the inner union of Anima and Animus, the sacred marriage within the soul. Carl Jung described Anima as the inner feminine in a man and Animus as the inner masculine in a woman. Yet he insisted that both live in every psyche. They are not bound by gender, but by archetype. They are the polarities of our inner life, intuition and logic, receptivity and action, tenderness and power. For the empath, long trained to live only as the caretaker, these inner figures often appear distorted. The animus may show up as a harsh critic, driving them to serve endlessly to prove their worth. The anima may appear as a shadowy seductress, luring them into enmeshment with others as a substitute for true intimacy.
But when the empath chooses themselves, these figures begin to shift. The tyrannical Animus is slowly transformed into a guardian, firm yet protective, able to draw boundaries with clarity. The manipulative Anima becomes a muse, guiding them toward creativity, intuition, and depth of feeling. What once enslaved now empowers. What once distorted now balances. Think of it like this. Before, the empath was a house with broken foundations. Guests came and went freely, rearranging the furniture, stealing from the cupboards, leaving the place in shambles. Now, with Animus as protector, the doors have locks, the walls have strength. With Anima as guide, the home fills with light, art, music, and meaning. The house is no longer a shelter for others alone, it is a sanctuary for the self. Dreams often reveal this transformation. An empath may dream of marriage, not literal, but symbolic. They stand beside an unknown figure at the altar, exchanging rings that glow with fire. Or they walk across a bridge where two rivers converge, the waters merging into one current. These are not ordinary dreams. They are the psyche's way of announcing the opposites within you are finding harmony. The marriage has begun. Carl Jung described Anima as the inner feminine in a man, and Animus as the inner masculine in a woman. Yet he insisted that both live in every psyche. They're not bound by gender, but by archetype. They are the polarities of our inner life, intuition and logic, receptivity and action, tenderness and power. For the empath, long trained to live only as the caretaker, these inner figures often appear distorted. The Animus may show up as a harsh critic, driving them to serve endlessly to prove their worth. The Anima may appear as a shadowy seductress, luring them into enmeshment with others as a substitute for true intimacy. But when the empath chooses themselves, these figures begin to shift. The tyrannical Animus is slowly transformed into a guardian, firm yet protective, able to draw boundaries with clarity. The manipulative Anima becomes a muse, guiding them toward creativity, intuition, and depth of feeling. What once enslaved now empowers. What once distorted now balances. Think of it like this. Before, the empath was a house with broken foundations. Guests came and went freely, rearranging the furniture, stealing from the cupboards, leaving the place in shambles. Now, with Animus as protector, the doors have locks, the walls have strength. With Anima as guide, the home fills with light, art, music, and meaning. The house is no longer a shelter for others alone, it is a sanctuary for the self. Dreams often reveal this transformation. An empath may dream of marriage, not literal, but symbolic. They stand beside an unknown figure at the altar, exchanging rings that glow with fire. Or they walk across a bridge where two rivers converge, the waters merging into one current. These are not ordinary dreams. They are the psyche's way of announcing the opposites within you are finding harmony. The marriage has begun. Carl Jung wrote, "The meaning of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." The same is true within the psyche. When Anima and Animus meet, when the empath finally allows both strength and tenderness to coexist, a transformation unfolds. They no longer swing between extremes of self-erasure and hidden rage. They no longer live only as giver or only as silent sufferer. They become paradox, fierce yet gentle, grounded yet open, sovereign yet compassionate. This sacred marriage also changes how the empath relates to others. In the past, relationships were magnets for projection. They sought partners who embodied their disowned Animus or Anima, hoping unconsciously to retrieve the missing pieces of themselves. But projection always disappoints. The lover who seemed powerful becomes controlling. The partner who seemed nurturing becomes suffocating. The empath found themselves once again depleted, bound by unconscious contracts. Now, with the inner marriage underway, something shifts. They no longer demand wholeness from others because they are discovering it within. Relationships are no longer fueled by hunger, but by reciprocity. They can stand beside another not as half seeking half, but as whole meeting whole. And in that meeting, true intimacy is born. This union is not without trial. The inner figures resist at first. Old habits whisper, serve or you will be abandoned. Merge or you will be alone. But slowly, through each act of self-respect, through each refusal to fall back into martyrdom, the voices quiet. The Animus learns to protect rather than punish. The Anima learns to inspire rather than ensnare. And when they join hands in the depths of the soul, the empath discovers balance at last. Consider the mythic imagery, the king and queen within the psyche joining in sacred marriage, ruling not with dominance, but with harmony. This is the moment the inner kingdom stabilizes. The empath no longer needs to run from shadow or sacrifice themselves to belong. They stand tall in a paradoxical posture, strong enough to set limits, soft enough to remain open. But this stage is not the final arrival. It is preparation. For once the inner marriage is sealed, the empath begins to radiate a different kind of presence, one that the outer world cannot ignore. And this new sovereignty will provoke resistance. Friends may fall away, families may accuse, lovers may rage. For those who once depended on the empath's endless giving, their newfound balance feels like betrayal. So the question becomes, when the empath wears this inner crown, when they embody both anima and animus in harmony, how will the world around them respond? And more importantly, will the empath have the courage to endure the exile that comes with sovereignty? That is where we must go next.
Have you ever dreamed of standing at an altar with a stranger, about to speak vows you never rehearsed? Or of two rivers merging into one, carrying you away in currents both fierce and tender? These images may sound strange, but for the empath who has survived the death of the martyr, such dreams are archetypal signposts. They announce the next stage of individuation, the inner union of anima and animus, the sacred marriage within the soul. Carl Jung described anima as the inner feminine in a man and animus as the inner masculine in a woman, yet he insisted that both live in every psyche. They are not bound by gender, but by archetype. They are the polarities of our inner life, intuition and logic, receptivity and action, tenderness and power. For the empath, long trained to live only as the caretaker, these inner figures often appear distorted. The animus may show up as a harsh critic, driving them to serve endlessly to prove their worth. The anima may appear as a shadowy seductress, luring them into enmeshment with others as a substitute for true intimacy. But when the empath chooses themselves, these figures begin to shift. The tyrannical animus is slowly transformed into a guardian, firm yet protective, able to draw boundaries with clarity. The manipulative anima becomes a muse, guiding them toward creativity, intuition, and depth of feeling. What once enslaved now empowers. What once distorted now balances. Think of it like this. Before, the empath was a house with broken foundations. Guests came and went freely, rearranging the furniture, stealing from the cupboards, leaving the place in shambles. Now, with animus as protector, the doors have locks, the walls have strength. With anima as guide, the home fills with light, art, music, and meaning. The house is no longer a shelter for others alone. It is a sanctuary for the self. Dreams often reveal this transformation. An empath may dream of marriage, not literal, but symbolic. They stand beside an unknown figure at the altar, exchanging rings that glow with fire. Or they walk across a bridge where two rivers converge, the waters merging into one current. These are not ordinary dreams. They are the psyche's way of announcing, the opposites within you are finding harmony. The marriage has begun. Carl Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed."
The same is true within the psyche. When Anima and Animus meet, when the empath finally allows both strength and tenderness to coexist, a transformation unfolds. They no longer swing between extremes of self-erasure and hidden rage. They no longer live only as giver or only as silent sufferer. They become paradox, fierce yet gentle, grounded yet open, sovereign yet compassionate. This sacred marriage also changes how the empath relates to others. In the past, relationships were magnets for projection. They sought partners who embodied their disowned animus or anima, hoping unconsciously to retrieve the missing pieces of themselves. But projection always disappoints. The lover who seemed powerful becomes controlling. The partner who seemed nurturing becomes suffocating. The empath found themselves once again depleted, bound by unconscious contracts. But now, with the inner marriage underway, something shifts. They no longer demand wholeness from others because they are discovering it within. Relationships are no longer fueled by hunger, but by reciprocity. They can stand beside another not as half seeking half, but as whole meeting whole. And in that meeting, true intimacy is born. This union is not without trial. The inner figures resist at first. Old habits whisper, serve or you will be abandoned. Merge or you will be alone. But slowly, through each act of self-respect, through each refusal to fall back into martyrdom, the voice is quiet. The animus learns to protect rather than punish. The anima learns to inspire rather than ensnare. And when they join hands in the depths of the soul, the empath discovers balance at last. Consider the mythic imagery, the king and queen within the psyche joining in sacred marriage, ruling not with dominance, but with harmony. This is the moment the inner kingdom stabilizes. The empath no longer needs to run from shadow or sacrifice themselves to belong. They stand tall in a paradoxical posture, strong enough to set limits, soft enough to remain open. But this stage is not the final arrival. It is preparation. For once the inner marriage is sealed, the empath begins to radiate a different kind of presence, one that the outer world cannot ignore. And this new sovereignty will provoke resistance. Friends may fall away, families may accuse, lovers may rage. For those who once depended on the empath's endless giving, their newfound balance feels like betrayal. So the question becomes, when the empath wears this inner crown, when they embody both anima and animus in harmony, how will the world around them respond? And more importantly, will the empath have the courage to endure the exile that comes with sovereignty?
Have you ever noticed how quickly people turn on you when you stop playing the role they wrote for you? One day, you were the reliable friend, the peacemaker, the healer. The next day, when you begin to say no, they whisper that you've changed. They call you selfish, cold, even cruel. This is the exile of the empath, the price of sovereignty. When the martyr dies and the inner marriage begins, the empath inevitably finds themselves cast out from the familiar stage of life. Family members grow distant, old friends drift away, lovers rage because the well of endless giving has run dry. To the outside world, this looks like betrayal, but to the inner world, it is initiation. Jung described individuation as a path that often separates us from the collective, forcing us into the wilderness so that the true self can emerge. Picture the empath standing alone in an empty theater. The lights that once shone on them have gone dark. The actors they once supported have left the stage. The props lie scattered like broken illusions. At first, the silence is unbearable. Who am I without these roles? Who am I if I am not needed? This is the abyss every awakening soul must face, the dark corridor between the death of the old identity and the birth of the new. Mystics call this the desert season, the wilderness trial. It is the place where illusions are stripped away and only the voice of the self remains. Jung once wrote, "The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious."
In exile, the empath begins to hear that voice clearly, louder than the accusations of others, louder than the whispers of fear. It says, "You are not what they need you to be. You are who you are." This is not an easy road. Loneliness bites. Guilt claws. Dreams turn dark. Many empaths at this stage dream of being chased from the tribe, of wandering through strange lands, of carrying only a lantern through vast and empty spaces. These are archetypal dreams, symbols of the transition from conformity to sovereignty. They remind the empath that exile is not punishment, but passage. And here lies the paradox. What feels like exile from others is in fact reunion with the self. The empath, no longer in mirror for everyone else, begins to see their own face for the first time. They discover small joys, silence that feels like freedom, solitude that feels like sanctuary, creativity that blossoms without permission. The crown of sovereignty does not arrive with trumpets, but with quiet dignity. Think of the archetypal hero's journey. The hero leaves the tribe, descends into the underworld, faces the shadow, and returns bearing an elixir. The empath's exile is the same. By enduring the wilderness, they forge the authority of the sovereign soul. They no longer rule by pleasing or appeasing, but by alignment with truth. Their crown is not given by the world, but by the self. Of course, the crown carries weight. To wear it is to live differently. Others sense it instinctively. Here is someone who cannot be manipulated. Here is someone who cannot be guilted into self-betrayal. Here is someone whose presence radiates quiet power. And though some may attack, others will be drawn to the flame, for sovereignty is magnetic. It both threatens and inspires. This is the transformation Jung hinted at when he spoke of individuation. It is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming whole. The empath, once outcast, now rises as sovereign flame, no longer a flickering candle consumed by others, but a steady fire that burns from its own source. But the question remains, once the empath claims this crown, once they stand as sovereign in their own inner kingdom, what gift will they bring back to the world? That answer awaits us in the final revelation.
So now we return to the question that began our journey. What happens when the empath finally chooses themselves? We have walked through the trap of being needed, the breaking point where the vessel says no more, the unleashing of shadow, the death of the martyr, the intermarriage of Anima and Animus, the exile of sovereignty, and the crowning flame of illumination. Each stage was not just a story, it was an initiation. When the empath chooses themselves, they step off the cross of unconscious sacrifice. They cease to be the sponge of the collective's wounds and become instead the lighthouse, steady and unshaken, casting light into the storm. Their sensitivity, once chaos, becomes wisdom. Their compassion, once enslavement, becomes freedom. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But it is also the most liberating. For to accept oneself is to integrate light and shadow, rage and tenderness, desire and innocence. It is to discover that you are not fragments scattered across the needs of others. You are a whole being, luminous and rooted." And here lies the paradox of individuation. By choosing yourself, you do not abandon love. You embody it. Love that is not fear of abandonment, but presence. Love that is not possession, but reciprocity. Love that does not demand your erasure, but celebrates your wholeness. This is the gift the empath brings back from their exile, not martyrdom, but illumination. Think of the hero's journey. After descending into the underworld, after facing shadow and death, the hero returns to the tribe with an elixir. The empath's elixir is their wholeness. It is the reminder that true service to humanity is not endless sacrifice, but authentic being. For a soul that has come home to itself becomes a beacon, and that light cannot be extinguished. So what happens when the empath chooses themselves? The tides of history shift, archetypes break, chains fall, and the world, whether it knows it or not, becomes a little freer. And now I turn to you. Perhaps as you listened, something stirred inside. Perhaps you recognized your own patterns, the beautiful trap, the silent martyrdom, the shadow you've been afraid to face. If so, let this be your breaking point. Let this be the day you whisper, "I choose myself." Type those words in the comments. I choose myself today. Declare it not for me, but for you. Because the act of choosing yourself is the first step toward individuation. And individuation is the greatest service you can render the world. If this message resonated, hit the like button. Subscribe if you want more journeys into the depths of the soul, into the forgotten wisdom of Jung and beyond. And above all, remember, your wholeness is not selfish, it is your gift. You are not here to be devoured. You are not here to vanish in service of other shadows. You are here to burn from the fire of your own authentic being. And that fire, once lit, will illuminate far more than you could ever imagine.